Welcome back. We take a closer look at the day's market action with Shaun Dendere from Trive Investments. Thank you so much for your time, Shaun. Of course, the big U.S. consumer inflation print for August came out hotter than we saw in July. And this is, of course, ahead of the big September monetary policy decision from the Fed. Of course, that coming next week. Could this stand in the way of the Fed cutting rates next week, looking at how hot it came out?
Firstly, thank you for having me. I think that the United States right now has a lot of complex data points. I don't think that it's going to hamper the potential interest rate cuts that are coming, well, that we hope are coming in next week, purely because, jobless claims have risen. Yesterday, we saw PPI numbers were a bit softer than people expected. NFP numbers last week as well were also a bit they were struggling there. So we can tell that, the United States economy is under a bit of pressure there, and they definitely need to do something to try reignite that economy. And looking at that inflation print, the question that rises there is that are we starting to slowly see the effects of the tariffs? That's obviously affecting that, the consumer price index, because I think it's actually the highest it's been this year, at least since January, the highest increase.
Yeah. And it's actually quite interesting because you talk about tariffs. I know a lot of people were trying to really gauge how the inflation picture would look like. But it's quite interesting to see that the focus now, particularly coming from the Fed, is more on the job market that we are seeing softness in right now. Well, talking about monetary policy, the European Central Bank held interest rates steady for the second time this year. And actually just looking at that inflation figure right now, that's around the 2% target. I would even say that that calls for a cut. What are the policymakers in the Eurozone seeing that I'm not seeing?
So, that is interesting. As you mentioned, they've held it twice. I think they themselves are seeing a lot of uncertainty economically, and once again, we refer back to those tariffs.
Yeah.
So for them, I think the safer route, or the narrative seems like they're taking the safer route, hold until, the picture gets a bit clearer. And going forward, we're just going to have to wait and see, what happens with that economy. Because yes, they are in that target range, as opposed to, to the United States that is struggling on the CPI front. If we look at the European zone, I do note that they are also diversifying their economy in order for them to, shy away from the tariffs. The same way I think South Africa is trying to diversify with different deals away from, the United States.
Now, right. Well, let's get into the company news that came out of the JSE. Starting off with FirstRand, it released its year-end results today, and we saw double-digit growth across the board there in its key financial metrics. Also quite encouraging to see that growth in lending, although there are some areas where we saw softer demand, of course, due to the financial pressures. But we did see the share climbing almost 7% the last time I checked today. What did investors hold on to there?
So I think, in my opinion, it really is a sign of what has happened the past, let's call it, financial year. We came from a period of high inflation, high interest rates, from a South African perspective, and the inflation started tapering down. We had a couple of rate cuts. So from a consumer perspective, that really benefits the consumer from, let's call it, disposable income. Therefore, for the likes of your FirstRand, that allows them to actually grow and supply or provide their product to a wider group of people.
Yeah,
and positively for them also, it's good that they did have these numbers, because there is that issue that they have been facing in the United Kingdom with that provision on the motor claims that they need to cover over time.
Yeah, it's really, really good news that the banks do keep outperforming the economy. Well, another company that has outperformed the economy is Discovery. But looking at that share price on the opposite side of the spectrum, we saw selling down of Discovery stock. I think at some point was down almost 6%. Of course, they posted their year-end results. And from my view, those were eye-watering growth numbers. I don't know if the markets were expecting more or if investors were taking profit. How would you characterize that performance? Yeah, actually down 10% on the day.
Yeah, from a share price perspective, I think it goes down to investor sentiment. I look at it from two perspectives. I believe that there was potential profit taking on that front, and also I do believe that, I think the results were expected. And, with Discovery, it is also quite a diversified group. Interesting enough, I think all the divisions are doing quite well, whether it's life insurance, health, vitality, etc. So I just lost my train of thought there. But yeah, so I guess it goes back to my reasoning behind what I mentioned with first rand
Yeah.
as well, as to that's a knock-on effect that's happening with with your financial services providers.
Ah, all right. Well, let's get to your stock pick for today. Where are you finding opportunity?
So currently, it looks like an easy one to pick for me. That'll be Anglo. I do note that you mentioned in your news segment, that the resources are actually pushing,
Yeah.
driving up, the SA top 40 there. But mainly because of the deal that they made that was announced earlier this week, if I'm not mistaken, that would have been yesterday.
Yes.
That seems to be the biggest deal in mining in the past decade. And if we look at the share price and how the market reacted yesterday, I think yesterday it even reached about 10, it was almost like, or the day before, it was 10% up. So it's something that I would go into as a long-term play and see how this merger works out for them.
Yeah, a lot of us kicking ourselves for not getting into this stock at an earlier stage. But thank you so much for your time and for your insights on what has moved investors' money today. Shaun, that was Shaun Dendere from Trive Investments.